Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 144. And a little catch up on what happened in the last issue. We saw the conclusion of the first Grant Morrison, Mark Millar story arc, where we found out that the Parliament of Trees had split Swamp Thing into two beings. One is just a pure elemental Swamp Thing, and the other is the spirit of Alec Holland, who thought for a while at least that he was human. He was able to form a human-looking body out of plant life, and he lived amongst humans in the jungle, but the problem was his subconscious kept trying to get out and trying to tell him that he is not a human, he is a plant, and that the pure elemental Swamp Thing is going to kill Abby. So while he was figuring all that out, in the background we saw Abby actually having dreams from Matthew the Raven, who is a character from Sandman that was actually from Swamp Thing. It used to be her ex-husband, and when he died, he became Matthew the Raven. So apparently he still cares for her a bit, and so he was warning her that this Swamp Thing elemental was coming for her. So she left Dawn her new bow and decided to fight this Swamp Thing on her own. So she went to the most desolate desert she could think of, Arizona, to meet this thing head on. And also in the background, we were getting this elemental Swamp Thing going to all the areas that it remembered from Alec Holland's life previously and killing everybody there. So it went to Chester's house first, and it killed some people that were staying there. And then it went to Terrebonne Parish in the swamps where all the Cajun people lived, and it killed over 60 of them, including longtime character in Swamp Thing, Jean Labostri. So all that was going on in the background as Alec was having visions brought on from a shaman named Roberto and some hallucinogens that he was giving Alec. And it turns out that Roberto is part of some kind of mystical group that is trying to lead Alec down a certain path where he will be doing some trials that involve other parliaments. And last issue, we found out about the Parliament of Stones. And there's three members of this group that are guiding Swamp Thing down this path. One of them is a shaman named Roberto. The other is a man named L. Blake. And finally, we have the old traveler who is unnamed. And all three of them visited Alec when he was having hallucinations, and they all led him back to America so that he could fight this elemental Swamp Thing and save Abby, which is what happens. She meets this Swamp Thing in the deserts of Arizona, and luckily Alec knew where to find her, so he shows up just as Abby's about to be killed by this elemental Swamp Thing. There's a big fight, of course, and in the end, Alec Holland's Swamp Thing was victorious, but it was super sad because he finally turned into the old school Swamp Thing so that he could show Abby that he is back, he loves her, he wants her, but it turned out that she did not want him. So she left him in the desert saying that, she can't do this, she can't live in a world of monsters, she's a human, and she does not want to be part of that world. And that is where we left off in the last issue. So first things first, with issue 144, we got the cover. We see in the background a city that is all in silhouette. It looks pretty run down. There's lots of smokestacks and tall buildings. And in the foreground, there is a mirror that is shattered. And in that mirror is some kind of monster. It looks kind of like it has human skin, but it's like super wrinkled or distorted. And its mouth is also crazy. It looks like it doesn't have any lips. And then the eyes of it are red. And of course, they're staring out straight at us. We also see on the front cover that this is written by Mark Millar with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMulder. And as we turn the page, we start off in New York in 1979. And in the first panel, we see a picture of a cathedral. It seems there is a magic show going on inside, I guess for the kids. And over these panels, we get some narration that says, "At 9:45, the cabaret in St. Augustine's Parish Hall was drawing to a close. All that remained to be seen was the magic act. Nobody knew the little man with the bag of tricks, but his face was so familiar. The children watched, enchanted by his every move." And we can see the magician on stage in front of the children, and he is a little person with red hair and red sideburns. I personally have never seen him before. I don't know why the children would know who he is, but he's got on a purple tuxedo with white gloves, and it seems he's about to do a trick that involves a large box because he's standing next to that and pointing to it. And the man is saying, "My final illusion demands a volunteer, boys and girls. A good man with a stout heart and a kind face. I require one Roman Catholic priest. And we see either the main priest or one of the priests of this local parish is walking up and he says, what the hell? The money's going to charity, right? And this priest is kind of just like a tall white guy. He's got an all black suit on with the little collar, so he's in his priest uniform, and he's got white hair and glasses. So the magician points towards a door that he opens up in this box and he says, "You're a good sport, Father Kelly. Baby Jesus will be proud." And as Father Kelly gets into the box, the magician says, "Step into the box, Father Kelly. There is nothing to fear. The Lord is your shepherd after all." And then playing to the kids in the crowd, the magician moves his hands in what seems like magical ways. And he says, "I'm told the good Father is the cornerstone of this poor Christian community. I intend to find out what happens when that cornerstone is removed. Abracadabra." And then he taps his wand on the box, and then the box falls apart in front of the children, and of course Father Kelly has disappeared. And as the magician takes a bow, he says, "Thank you and good night, boys and girls. I hope you all enjoyed the show." But of course, the children in the audience are confused. They're saying, "What about Father Kelly? Aren't you going to bring him back?" And as the magician walks down the steps on the side of the stage, he says, "Your priest shall never return, child. He has been sent to the shadow world of the dead men, a living puppet for the damned." And as he says this, he waves his hands, and all of a sudden, insects come from the center of where that box was on the stage, and they begin flying out in a large cloud that begins to attack the children. And of course, they're all running in confusion and trying to get these bugs off of them. And the narration over this panel says, "There wasn't a living soul who didn't love Father Kelly. His brief summer months at St. Augustine's had already changed so many lives. That's why he was chosen. The devil collects the purest hearts from God's good earth." Then we get one last panel of the box itself as it broke down on the stage. And it seems like they're kind of focusing on the middle where the father supposedly disappeared and the insects came out of, like it is some sort of portal to hell. And as we turn the page, we see that the name of this issue is called A Hope in Hell. And we cut to modern day, which is 1994, I believe. And we're seeing the cathedral again, but this time it is all broken down. You can see the boards over the windows and the front door. And there's a lot of homeless people living in front of it on the street. In the foreground, we can see people selling drugs and people buying drugs and also alcoholics sleeping on the ground. So it looks like since Father Kelly was taken, his parish and his area has definitely gone downhill. And as we turn the page, we see a bus arrive in New York, and we get some narration that says, "Matt Cable arrived in New York shortly before sunset." Then we see a man getting off the bus, and someone is yelling, Matt Cable, I don't believe it. I haven't seen you in years, buddy." And as the man who is being called Matt Cable turns to see who's talking to him, he sees a large man running towards him and finishing his sentence saying, "Jesus, you haven't changed a bit." Then we get a full view of the person that just got off the bus that this guy is calling Matt Cable. And I gotta say, this Matt Cable does not look anything like the previous Matt Cables we've seen. So the fact that he could recognize him is kind of ridiculous, but I'll describe him for you. He's a tall white guy. He's got really big glasses that I think are sunglasses because they're all blacked out, and they're round, so it kind of gives him a bug-eye look. And then he's got black short hair that's got like a widow's peak in the front of it, and he's wearing like a plain black suit. And in this panel, we do get a hint of who this person actually is because the writing in the word balloons and the shape of the word balloons is the same font and style as Swamp Thing when he talks. So Matt Cable turns to the man who says he recognizes him and says, I am sorry. I think you have mistaken me for someone else." But the man doesn't give up. He gives a smile and says, "Still a crazy bastard, huh? Take off the shades and quit fooling around, you asshole." And then the man reaches out to take his sunglasses off, and Matt Cable kind of freaks out and pushes him away and says, "No, don't touch me." And then he takes off running through the crowd of people at the bus station saying, "Excuse me, please." And as he's running, we see the supposed friend of Matt Cable getting up from the ground and he yells, "You dumb son of a bitch!" And then he takes off running after Matt Cable. And when he catches up to him, he grabs Matt Cable's jacket to turn him around and he says, "Hold on a minute, pal. You're going nowhere." But Matt Cable turns around and takes his glasses off as he does. And we get this great panel of Matt Cable staring at this man very intensely with eyes that are red and black on the outside with yellow pupils in the middle. And as he turns, Matt Cable yells, "I said, Get away from me. And with that, the man lets go and Matt Cable walks off, and the man kind of says under his breath, Jesus Christ, sorry I said anything. Then as we turn the page, we cut to Louisiana, and the narration says, in Louisiana, the Marines descend into the marshes. And I see what I guess are Marines walking through the marshes of the swamp. And they say they're Marines, but they look more like futuristic Nazis or something. They have like full body and face gear on. They have some kind of future weapons that are hooked to tanks on their backs. Their face masks have gas masks on the front and also really, really big red goggles on their helmets. So it gives them a very World War II SS fascist kind of look. And also none of them have like patches or any identification on their suits either. But the narration said they were Marines, so I'm going to go with that. So as they walk around the swamps, one of them says, we shouldn't be doing this. They can't ask ordinary guys to hunt down swamp monsters. That's why we got superheroes, right? And another soldier answers, screw superheroes, Harris. Those shitheads don't like to get their tights dirty. And then another man yells out, shut up, Bogner. Stay alert. This bastard's already slaughtered 60 Cajuns. Then Bogner says, I thought the size said the monster's been weakened. Some sort of divorce from nature. They said it should be like hunting down a big gorilla. Then Bogner notices something on his scanner and he says, shit, the needle's picking up something big. It's jumping off the scale, 50 yards west. Move it. Then Harris, the first guy that talked, says, Christ, my balls have shriveled up like prunes. Then the leader of the Marines yells out, fan out and get ready to attack. And Bogner seems pretty excited. He yells out, man, this is gonna be good, as he runs forward towards wherever the signal is coming from. So him and a bunch of other Marines run over a hill, and as they crest it, they see a giant Swamp Thing body that is definitely one of his husks. It is overgrown, and it looks like the bark of a tree that's in the shape of a Swamp Thing. And we can see other trees are growing out of it, and there's a lot of moss and everything at its base. So this might actually be one of the husks that were left over from the Nancy Collins run when Swamp Thing had to grow himself all big and was fighting Thunderpetal. So as the Marines see this giant Swamp Thing, Harris says, holy mother of God, how do we fight that thing? And we can see as they're running towards it, they all have like flamethrowers attached to these canisters on their backs. So they all pull those out and everyone's got flames already started at the front of their flamethrower, and they point them at the Swamp Thing, and Bogner yells out, burn the bastard! So they all take aim and they fire their flamethrowers at the face of this giant Swamp Thing. And it does light on fire, but of course it's just a husk, so it's not yelling or doing anything that shows it's in pain. So the commanding officer runs up and says, stop it, Harris, hold your fire. This isn't the swamp monster. Look at its eyes. They're empty. It's just one of his old body constructs. So Harris and the rest of the guys stop shooting their flamethrower, and Bogner asks, Colonel Snyder, what are we going to do now? And Colonel Snyder takes off his mask as he walks away from the men, and he kind of rubs his head like he doesn't know what he's going to do now. And he says to Bogner, we're pulling out, Bogner. It's like fighting a mountain or shooting at a hurricane. We're out of our league here. I think it's time we called in the experts. Then we cut back to New York in a very bad part of town. We can see a motel sign, and on the side of that motel, we see a prostitute meeting with a John and people selling drugs. Then we cut to the inside of that motel, and we see the person that looks like Matt Cable is standing in front of the mirror with scissors, and we're seeing there's a bunch of plant-like growths coming out of his skin. So he's taking those scissors and he's cutting them and trimming them off, almost like he's shaving. And we see the narration over these panels says, the swamp monster checked in at 9 p.m. He insisted on a room with a bath and a toilet and paid $60 in cash. Having a toilet was important to him, which was strange. He hadn't had a shit in almost 20 years. Now he snips the foliage from a dead man's face and tries not to catch a stolen reflection. So as he's clipping these plant growths off of his face and body, he's putting them in the toilet and flushing them down, which is why he needed a toilet, I guess. And this motel, I'm assuming, is built for a very specific purpose, because if rooms don't have baths and toilets in them, then this place is probably only used for prostitution. And as we just heard in the narration, this is in fact Swamp Thing. You might have been able to guess earlier, but if you remember from the last story arc, he is able to make a human form now out of his plants. But apparently little plants will grow out of that sooner or later, so that is why he is shaving. So as he's doing this, we see that he's trying to avoid looking in the mirror directly, and I guess this is for a reason. I've never heard of this before, but As Swamp Thing looks in the mirror, it shatters and explodes glass straight at him, so a bunch of glass shards go into his arms and face. And the narration over this panel says, "The mirror gives up sooner than the last one. It can only take so much." So I'm not exactly sure why the mirror shatters, I guess just because he looks so weird. And they don't really explain it, because as we turn the page, we go back to Louisiana and the swamps. And in the swamps, we see some weird creatures crawling around. They look like giant spiders, and it looks like they're combing through the waters of the swamp, and they have one big, bright green eye in the center of their body. And it looks like they're looking for something. And over these panels, the narration says, "In Louisiana, the bayous are silent now. The waters are dark and empty, and the birds no longer nest in the trees. The only movement is the stilted leg agents of the Parliament, scouring the reeds with their searchlight faces, their only purpose to find and destroy the swamp god. He knew he was running out of time." Then we get some panels of Swamp Thing calling someone on the phone, and we can't hear the other person on the line, but we hear Swamp Thing say, "Could I speak to Miss Agnes Asherman, please? It's her son-in-law calling. My name? It is Alec Holland. I was the husband of her daughter, Linda." Then we cut to an old folks' home, and we see a nurse at the front desk is saying, "I'm sorry, sir. I think there must be some mistake. Miss Asherman doesn't have a family. Her daughter and son-in-law are dead." And Swamp Thing replies, "I cannot explain everything over the phone, but I need money to get out of the country. There are creatures pursuing me." And that, of course, all sounds crazy, so the nurse says, "Get off the line or I'm calling the cops, asshole." But a very desperate Swamp Thing yells out, "Please, don't hang up. I need to speak to Agnes. She is my only hope." And we don't hear it, but the nurse hangs up on the other end, and Swamp Thing is left in an empty black room saying, "Hello?" Then we cut to a nearby church where I guess Swamp Thing has gone in his desperation, and he is kneeling down in front of where you light candles for people, and he's lighting a candle, and he's saying a prayer, "For my wife, Lord, let Linda be safe and happy in heaven." And then he pauses for a second, and then he continues saying, "Oh God, oh dear God, please help me." And then he begins to cry, and as he does, we see the candle that he has lit goes out, and this makes Swamp Thing look up, and he puts his glasses back on because he sees someone coming in, and we see someone say, "Alec Holland?" And this mysterious figure walks forward, and as he does, Swamp Thing takes off his sunglasses, and he says, "Who are you? How do you know my name?" Then we see the person step into the light, and we see it is in fact Father Kelly from the beginning of this story, and he looks exactly the same. He hasn't aged a day, and he says, "Rumors of your misery have reached even the pits of hell, Alec Holland. I prayed to God to comfort you, and he granted me 1 hour by your side." And then Father Kelly walks past Swamp Thing over to a couple of the statues inside of this church, and he says, "I understand you were married in this church. It holds a special significance for me too, Alec. I had such plans for this place. Now look at it. Remove the cornerstone, and the whole structure comes tumbling down. Perhaps they were right all along." Then Swamp Thing walks over to Father Kelly as Father Kelly stares at the crucifix, and Swamp Thing looks up at it and says, "You could not have come from hell. You are made from flesh and bone." And Father Kelly replies, "Many living things have been dragged into the abyss, Alec. A ripe human is considered a delicacy in the pit. A good priest is the ultimate prize." And then Father Kelly goes to the front pew and takes a seat, and he continues saying, "I was led there by an earthbound demon known as a retriever. Its job is to locate a pivotal force of good in a deprived community and remove him. The balance of good and evil then tilts into the shade, and the community slips into despair. It's a more common practice than you would imagine." And Swamp Thing asks, "But if you too are damned, can you really help me?" And Father Kelly answers, "I will do what I can, Alec. I came to this parish to help people, and God has given me another chance. Time may be short, but there is one thing I have wished for in all my despair." And Swamp Thing asks, "What is that?" And then Father Kelly stands up and begins to walk really quickly down the middle aisle of the church, and he answers Swamp Thing saying, "A brisk walk. It's been such a long time since I've had a breath of fresh air." So Father Kelly goes outside, and Swamp Thing follows him, and Father Kelly asks, "Why did the Parliament of Trees seek to destroy you? What did you do to anger them?" And Swamp Thing answers, "I fell in love. I gave up everything for a beautiful woman, but her love for me withered and died. She left me, and now I have nothing." And the father says, "Surely you're allowed to make one mistake." And Swamp Thing responds, "I have made many, since nature chose me as its champion. I have been chastened often for clinging to my humanity." And Father Kelly looks kind of sad at Swamp Thing, and he says, "You can't hide from them forever, Alec. Perhaps it would be best if you stepped back into the green and tried to reason with them." And Swamp Thing replies, "If I entered the green again, I would never be allowed to escape. They would simply select another to take my place. Nature knows no sentimentality. A stranger told me that I must take my final stand against the Parliament in the German Black Forest, a haunted European woodland where their powers are least effective. I was told that there I might stand a chance against them in battle, and so I entered the green one last time and formed myself in the image of a long-dead friend. His home has remained unchanged by time, avoided by superstitious buyers. I took what clothes still hung in his wardrobe, his passport, and money I could find. I am sure he would have approved." And under this talking, we're getting panels of what he's saying. So we're seeing the Swamp Thing form this Matt Cable body, and then Swamp Thing is Matt Cable naked running into Matt Cable's old house to get his stuff. Then we cut back to Swamp Thing and Father Kelly walking down the alleyways, and as they're walking, we are seeing the horribleness of this neighborhood. Like I said before, there's prostitutes, there's drug use, there's drug dealing, and a lot of homelessness. So as they walked down an alley, Swamp Thing continues his story saying, "I had enough money to reach New York, but now that I am here, I fear I can go no further." And as Swamp Thing says this, Father Kelly checks his watch and he says, "It's odd how quickly the hands of a watch move in the real world. My gateway to hell should be opening soon." And Swamp Thing says, "But you said you could help me." And Father Kelly replies, "Smell the air, Alec. The scent is unmistakable. The stench of despair hangs just around the corner." And as we turn the page, they're standing in front of a giant old theater that's been abandoned. And I guess it was called the Atlas, but one of the A's is missing. And as they stand in front of the big double doors of the movie theater, the father says, "Think twice before you step inside the Black Forest. I have heard rumblings in the pit over terrible events to take place there soon. The sorcerer has returned, my friend. I can say nothing more." And then behind him, one of the double doors opens, and we see the magician from the beginning walk out of them, and as he does, he says, "It's time to go back, Father Kelly. You no longer belong among these living things." And then Father Kelly says, "Wait a moment. There is something I must give the swamp creature before I go." And then Father Kelly reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a letter, and he hands it to Swamp Thing saying, "I raised $800 of charity the night they took me, Alec. If your heart truly tells you to go to this terrible place, then this should make your journey easier." And with that, the father turns around and walks through the double doors of the theater, and Swamp Thing calls after him, "Father Kelly, you do not have to go back. You were sent to hell by deception. God would not allow such an injustice to take place." And the father turns just as he's about to enter the doors, and he says, "I have been told I am hell's emissary. I teach the word of the Lord in the abyss. God is good. He granted me 1 hour among the living. I will put my trust in him." And then he walks through the doors, and Swamp Thing yells, "No!" But the magician cuts Swamp Thing off, saying, "Leave him. He has made his decision." Then we see Father Kelly walking through the doors, and there's just light behind his back as he walks into a black room, and he says, "Okay, you bastards, do your worst." And then we cut to the outside of the theater where the magician is closing the doors, and he says to Swamp Thing, "Father Kelly is indeed a brave man, but he is misguided. God does not heed the whimpering of the damned." And Swamp Thing says, "But God sent him to help me. God answered his prayers." And then the magician smiles evilly and straightens his tie and says, "You are as naive as you are grotesque, monster. His God did not pardon him from hell. We released him ourselves." And then the magician puts on his bowler hat and he gives a wink to Swamp Thing and says, "An hour spent on God's earth makes hell a little bit more terrible, Dr. Holland. We did not release him out of kindness. We only wish to compound his torment." And Swamp Thing replies, "That is monstrous." And with a smile, the magician says, "Indeed, Perhaps we will do it again sometime. And then he turns to the street and yells, "Taxi!" And instantaneously a taxi appears. So the magician gets in and he rolls down the window and he hands Swamp Thing a business card and he says, "Suffering is my craft, Dr. Holland. I take pride in my work. Perhaps I have something here to darken even your bleak day. It's the name of a woman who caters to people with special needs. People like you and me." And then Swamp Thing takes the card and he looks at it and he says, "Oh my God." And then there's a panel of the card face so we can see what he's looking at. And we see on the card the silhouette of a naked woman, and she's in a stripper pose. And like I said, she's in silhouette, so you can't really see anything, but she's obviously nude, and her legs are spread open, and where her crotch would be is an apple. And then there's writing on the card that says, "Cast forbidden fruit. Call Linda Holland, Amsterdam." And with that, the magician rolls up his window and he smiles as he does it, and he says, "Give her a call, doctor. She's a real peach." And then he gives a big evil smile as the taxi pulls away, and Swamp Thing yells after him, "Wait! Come back! Who gave you this? What does it mean?" Then as we turn the page, we see Alec Holland walking back into the church that he met Father Kelly in, and he's looking at the card as he stands in front of the crucifix, and he says, "Oh, Linda, what has happened to you? What is going on?" And then all of a sudden, the atmosphere in the church gets different and begins to change, and Swamp Thing can feel it, and the narration says, "Stolen footsteps echo through the empty church. There is no one here, not even God. Something slithers up the cross and giggles like a girl. The swamp monster knows he is not safe here. He knows it is time to move on." And Swamp Thing looks up at Jesus on the cross, and the face of Jesus has changed to be distorted, and it's giving a very evil grin as it looks down on Swamp Thing. Then we cut to a U.S. Army base in the Nevada desert, and we're seeing two military personnel walk down a hallway after exiting an elevator. And one of them is saying, "The president's pissed off about this whole Swamp Thing business. We were assured there wouldn't be any more trouble after Gotham City, and now 64 Cajuns are dead. People just don't feel safe anymore." Then they walk into a very large room where we see the back of a man sitting in a chair, and he's watching a giant screen, and the screen is of Batman fighting a bunch of different types of Swamp Things. And this is actually from the Alan Moore run, I believe it's issue 50 through 53, where Swamp Thing went to Gotham and battled Batman. And the man talking before continues talking as he enters the room saying, "I'm not convinced calling in Nelson Strong was such a good idea. He's too dangerous, too unpredictable." Then the man he was walking with says, "The president was elected because he promised to get tough on superhuman activity. Hiring Nelson Strong is the smartest move Clinton's made in 18 months. I mean, let's face it, who wants another Gotham City?" And as the man says this, the camera cuts to in front of the person sitting in the chair watching the Gotham footage. And it is an old grizzled white man who's smoking a pipe, and he's got white, very short hair and a very impressive white mustache. And he also has an eye patch on his right eye, so you know he's been through some stuff. And we can assume that this person is in fact the man, the military personnel we're talking about, Nelson Strong. But that, my friends, is the end of the issue, so we'll have to wait until next time to find out who this person is and why President Clinton has hired him. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And until next time, remember to stay swampy.